jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show.
Join us as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
Listener discretion is advised. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show.
Welcome, ladies and gents. So, once again, another great guest on here tonight. We got Richard from the Direct Video Digest. How are you, sir?
Hey, Cam. Yeah, all good. Looking forward to tonight's discussion.
Yeah, and so we were just looking at various franchises we could all tackle together, and I can't remember if I brought it up or if Richard brought it up, and I was just like, sure, let's just tackle all of Seagal's filmography. Just like, and it's not more.
Well, I think what it was, we were talking about various things, and I said, "Have you done a show on Steven Seagal?" And I think you said, "No, I haven't." And,
that's what it was. Yes,
it's like, yeah, that'd be cool. Let's talk about these franchises.
You're right. You brought it up, and I had it on the back burner, and I was like, sure, we'll frame it basically where we're just talking about his various movies and unofficial sequels and what have you.
Because he's got all these themes that flow. I mean, even if it's not like a proper character franchise or something where he repeats the same character, there's like these unofficial series, where there's thematic relations or whatever, and it's just quite interesting how they are, in their own way, they are franchises distinct to him, which I think is quite interesting.
Totally. So, for those who don't know, yes, he starts off with the Under Siege films, playing Marine Chef Casey Ryback, and then follows it up with a bunch of movies where he saves the environment, then a bunch of movies where he co-stars with a rapper or gets on a plane to defuse some problems, and then, or he's aping his whole out for justice, marked for death persona, and then he has Half Past Dead, and then he has The Foreigner, which is followed by Black Dawn under a different name for whatever reason, and then a bunch of these other movies where he's playing an ex-special forces guy called John Alexander, and that's where it's pretty much it, because the rest is, like you say, is like you can all kind of just assume they're all somewhat kind of go hand in hand. Even if he's not playing the same guy, he's kind of playing the same guy.
Yeah, well, even some of the other stuff, the stuff that's not the stuff we're generally focusing on tonight, but something like Pistol Whipped, which I look at as it's basically above the law too. But they've, they couldn't use it because thematically it's got very similar stuff. The whole being a Catholic and being a law enforcement guy and cop or whatever, and trying to help bring the usual action stuff. But there's points where he goes. His career started out and he was like playing Catholics, and then he kind of went into the Buddhism and everything. So it was interesting in that film. He kind of went back to it. So that's what always made me feel like, there's a lot of stuff on IMDb. It says like above the law too. It's never going to happen, I don't think. But I feel like we've already had it. It was just under a different name. Like we say a lot of, some of these other
Beyond
films
the Law. It's more than a name reference. It's practically a similar plot.
Well, that was the funny thing because, as of this point, he hasn't released another film. So his first film was Above the Law, and his last film, as of the moment, was Beyond the Law. So if he never makes another film, that's a really weird bookend, isn't it? To just
right.
sort of end.
After so,
but I'm sure he will. I'm sure he'll turn up somewhere. But that was his last film, that would be an interesting a pair of bookends anyway. So
and with
should we
so
start?
many movies where he's basically, for lack of a better word, basically, he comes on set now for like a few hours a day, and then lets everyone else figure it out. So
Yeah.
you never know.
Oh yeah, he's gone through all that. I mean, that's where Bruce Willis is now. You see,
Yep.
Seagal's kind of been usurped. I mean, there was a point when the DTV guys of the 90s, Gary Daniels and all that, kind of got pushed to the wayside because the box office stars, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal, they ended up in DTV. Yep. And now Bruce Willis has kind of pushed Seagal and Van Damme out because he's pretty much doing everything now. Well, it was Nicolas Cage and then Bruce Willis, but Bruce Willis is like churning out so many films now. It's crazy.
Well, yeah. First, he was just basically doing whatever the 16 rounds and hostage producers wanted, and now, like you say, he's kind of where early Van Damme and Wesley Snipes direct-to-video era kind of were, and so my co-host John heard a rumor that he might actually have dementia, and so that would actually make a little more sense to me.
Yeah, I hope it's not anything like that. That seems a bit. Not sure whether if that was the case, is he doing it to get as many roles and sort of.
I know he's at that point
line
where he doesn't want to be on.
Anyway.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I know he doesn't want to be on set all that much for like too long.
No.
So.
But Seagal definitely was kind of the ones who did that kind of thing for, well, you could say Marlon Brando, but in terms of the action hero guys, he's really got he's got no excuse. But yeah, in the the 2000s was when Seagal really, he ended up doing the films that he probably didn't want to make because he was used to making bigger movies, and he just didn't want to involve himself that much. Although at times he would say he did, but that's one of the contradictions about him. He says one thing and then does another. But the films that came out, even the better ones, some of them, like Submerged, for example, which is a total mess, but I've got a real soft spot for it. It's all over the place, and you can see that Seagal isn't involved. There's like a whole big, massive, unusual for that period. And you wouldn't see it now, but like a big action sequence that takes place in a tunnel with a tank and loads of extras or whatever. And if you look closely, Seagal is not there. His scenes seem to have been shot separately. And there was another bit in he did the film Flight of Fury, which was a remake of a Michael Dudikoff film called Black Thunder, although it wasn't official. It wasn't an official remake. It was like they basically didn't tell the writer, and they completely ripped off his script and everything, and they changed a few bits around, but Seagal got the screenplay credit along with his co-writer. But they
even used stock footage of the same thing. Yeah, it's so weird.
Oh yeah, it was Iron Eagle, and they got the but there's a fight scene that takes place early in the film where I'm 100% sure that the two things were shot completely separately. His shots and the guys he's fighting, not in the same place. And then there's a whole bunch of other movies where they've, and we'll mention a couple of them later, like Black Dawn or whatever, where there's action scenes where he's not involved at all. They haven't even, in some cases, they'll cut in shots of him, but in other cases, they just don't even bother. They literally just shoot the whole scene with a double. Today You Die being a good example of that. And I think that's a case of, he falls out with the producer, whatever. The producers want more action in the movie, but he doesn't want to do it. So they just go, okay, if you're not even going to do, the close-ups or whatever that we can cut into that, then we're just going to have to, because we need action in this movie, we're just going to have to shoot it without you.
Essentially what he's at. Yeah. And I mean, the script ripoff for, Flight of Fury, I think was just one of those, they were just tinkling, because a lot of his productions were by Andrew Stevens of the infamous, franchise pictures. And I think it was just one of those, is like, they were all basically, they sound on paper like a simple James Bond or Iron Eagle kind of script. And the rest of them almost always just end up becoming kind of Die Hard or Commando type movies, or like you say, a variation on his Above the Law or Under Siege persona. He just can't escape it. And I guess, like you say, he's bored. And I did hear about the making of Submerged, how I mean, the reason he worked with the cinematographer who had done movies like Jeepers Creepers and, Don E. Fauntleroy, I think is his name.
Oh yeah, Don Fauntleroy. Yeah,
yeah, he directed, Urban Justice and a few others just because, he got along with him on Submerge, but he and the director Anthony Hickok, so Warlock 2 and Hellraiser Free Fame were not seen eye to eye. So it's just a weird, like you say, combo. He selectively chooses who he will or won't get along with.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you see certain people like Keone Waxman, who's the director he's worked with most, and they've made several, films together, plus the True Justice TV series. Yes. So he's probably done half the work he's done in his entire career with this one guy, and then everyone else he's kind of he's either done. So Flight of Fury was Michael Cooch, I think his name was. He did 3 films with him. So there's kind of another unofficial trilogy there of 3 films that he did with that guy. And then was it obviously Andrew Stevens, he did Above the Law and then Under Siege. But a lot of, then a lot of the other people he works with only once generally, but including himself, because obviously he directed himself once.
Right. Yeah, he keeps popping up in a lot of these movies, and he doesn't give great performances, but it's like he was kind of like Roger Corman. He just loved the movie making industry so much, he just could not help himself. He's like, please, just work me in there. I want to have some fun while I'm watching you do your thing. I'm like, okay. Well, it doesn't have anything to do with the story, but yeah, sure, you can play a security guard. You can play a guy yelling, no, in the background. And he does it with Dolph Lundgren's movies too.
Yeah. Should we start with Under Siege then?
You
this
know
is his most famous franchise. I'll be honest, I've never been a massive fan of the first Under Siege, and this is kind of the film that he's most famous for. Everyone knows him for. It's his biggest success. But when you actually watch it, he's actually not in it that much. It's much more about Gary Busey and Tommy Lee Jones. They're the big scene stealers in the movie.
Yeah.
And also you've got...
They even work in a direct reference, having Tommy Lee Jones's character name be similarly named to his Under Siege character in Mechanic 2. So I think this is it. It was just a move. It's just so wild too how, this made so much money, and then when they wanted to do the original pitch for Die Hard 3, where it was basically Die Hard on a boat, they had to change it to just a Mad Bomber movie because they're like, it's too similar to Under Siege. But it's like, who besides Seagal fans were watching Under Siege? It definitely did not make as much money as, say, something like Speed and some of the other Die Hard knockoffs. And like you say, Seagal is just barely in it. He's effective. But I think it's just because, again, Andrew Davis was patient with him. He had already gone along with him on Above the Law. And like you say, Garrett Busey basically makes the movie because he's just having so much fun as this bizarre, deceptive guy. And at the same time, it kind of makes you wonder how they really got this far in their career to plan this whole, deal. But I mean, the characters, not the actors, but it's just like, like you say, it takes nowadays when you watch it, it is pretty self-indulgent and pretty slow. But I think it was just the batshit crazy action in the second half that's what everyone remembered it for.
Yeah, and I think that it has those features that are the hallmarks of some of the best stuff and some of the most interesting stuff is Seagal's being surrounded by really good actors, really good character actors. And that was something that carried over into when he did On Deadly Ground, because that's got an amazing supporting cast. But in here we've got we've got Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey, but then there was Erika Eleniak, and there was I can't remember. I'm trying to remember the guy. His name. He was in
Call Meany from Con Air and Star Trek.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So that's quite an unusual role because it's like he's usually he's Star Trek and
way
everything.
More subtle, and he had just done Last of the Mohicans, but he wasn't visible in the final cut until years later when the director's cut was seen. So it's just he's been in just so many kind of productions, and I think at that point he was he was just starting, so he couldn't turn down anything. But I've never heard him talk bad about any movie he's worked on. I think he's just always been just a go-to character actor. But yeah, I mean,
I thought he was, and he's really good in it as well. So
totally,
the whole team are good. But yeah, Seagal. So he's established as Casey Ryback. He's got some great lines, got some great moments.
Raymond
but it was
Cruz is in
really,
it.
yes. But it was really, for me, it was Under Siege 2. That was kind of the film. I think if I could look at a film that was probably the one that made me a fan more so. I mean, I did enjoy the early films like Above, Out for Justice and Hard to Kill and stuff, but sort of the one that cemented it for me was probably Under Siege 2, and that's a much more Seagal focused film. You know, it's all about you know, he's right there from the start. It's all kind of built around him and the relationship he's got with his niece. He's wearing that super cool suit, which, even though he's falling off of cliffs and everything, doesn't really get any dirt on it. And, you know,
Yeah,
I think that's it's a typical Warner Brothers action film of the time. You know, there's nothing particularly flashy about it. It's very sort of functional in what it's doing, but I just think it's one of the best, for me, one of the best Die Hard knockoffs. And again, really good supporting cast. Eric Bogosian as the villain, and I can't remember I've lost the name. The guy.
Everett McGill from License to Kill and People Under the Stairs. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, so he's a really good henchman for him to have that fight with, and you know, there's all the silly moments and stuff, like Seagal's running through the train at the end when it crashes and stuff. It's completely ridiculous, but totally. I love all that. It's like, and all the satellite stuff. I just think, I mean, that's one I can just go back to again and again. I think it's just it's a lot of fun.
I totally. It gets shat on nowadays, but I think Outlaw Vern even summed up perfectly in the Seagology book that it does have a pretty cool, just World War III kind of causing scenario. Is like, yeah, this is basically almost kind of an EMP kind of device that could literally kind of devastate the whole country and electrical grid. What they're trying to do.
Well, what's funny is it basically, I think it came out the same year as GoldenEye, the James Bond film, which has basically the same plot device, which is the GoldenEye satellite, which can be used as a weapon. So satellite weapons were like the thing that people were worried about at that time, and it just seems to. I think they both came out in 1995. I might be wrong, but you're right. And like you say, I mean, everything was a craze. People were, if they weren't doing a martial arts thriller like East Meets West, or even just bunch of virtual reality ones, they were pretty much doing a lot of other doomsday devices, and it is interesting how, I mean, it even came out the same year as Outbreak, and you know, it's so wild how, you know, we've now seen a lot of stuff in real life society that mirrors a lot of these blockbusters, and so it's just so wild when we see them now. It's like, man, it's like these blockbusters, did they want to predict the future, or did they just want to take anything that was into crazy headlines and embrace it as, you know, an easy blockbuster plot, and just the rest is just star power and let filmmakers do what they want to do, you know? Mm-hmm. But he gets better lines here. He gets better kills. And like you say, the villains, they just really chew the scenery. Even Peter Green from Pulp Fiction and Patrick Kilpatrick from Best of the Best too. And just like, absolutely fun. Yeah, it's fantastic. Peter Green actually later turned up in the film Ticker, which Steven Seagal did for Albert Pune. So that was quite cool. You know, it's sort of quite nice to. It's always quite nice to see that. I mean, this is quite common, as like you say, Vern pointed out in Seagalogy, like the regulars, you know, people who turn up in one film after another for whatever reason it is. Maybe they're friends with the producer or whatever, and so they get them back or something. But he's often seen with, you know, recurring, you know, co-stars. And Peter Green that's quite an unexpected one, because he was I mean, when he did this, you know, he'd done Pulp Fiction previously and stuff. He's only got a small role in Under Siege, but I think he's got that cool, because he's like got that smarmy, overconfident sort of sleazebag kind of thing going on. And he does that really well. And later in Ticker, he's just sort of, being a jerk, basically. He's a really good actor playing being a jerk. And so Seagal's quite good at taking down those guys, even though he's generally a jerk himself.
Yeah. My best pal, John Cann, who's a stuntman, his credits include X-Men and Miss Congeniality and Tango and Cash. And he was in Out for Justice, and he didn't even make the final cut, but if he did, he was basically a henchman who got stomped on. And the stunt coordinator on that told him, be facing upward on your belly when he stomps you instead of your back. Otherwise, he'll literally pulverize your spine. And it was just one of those, he just wanted to pick on anyone who just for the fucking hell of it. And it's just hysterical because, like you say, he selectively chooses who he wants to work with. And I mean, some of the bit part actors that do pop up, they're just often in just small select roles that they don't necessarily share the scene with them, and they're working actors. So definitely their perspectives are going to change. I know Anthony Francis interviewed William Forsythe years ago, and when he was asked about working with Seagal, he was like, man, fucking Steven Seagal, man. That's all I can tell you. Fucking Steven Seagal.
well, the most common one, the most well-known one is John Leguizamo.
Yeah,
tells the story of when he was on Executive Decision, but that wasn't even. I mean, he didn't mention. I don't think he mentioned it in that interview, but he had worked with Seagal before because I think he was in he had a cameo. Yeah, I think it was Out for Justice or How to Kill, one of the two. And I think you literally see him for like a second. He's like buying some dope or something, and he doesn't really get much of a role. But he has been in more than one Seagal film. I don't actually think he had any interactions with him in that point, but I think that's because that was the Warner Brothers thing. They kind of, Warner Brothers were aware of him. They knew he'd done things. So then they get him for this other film, which is a much bigger role. And Seagal didn't really like that. So
even Raymond, I mentioned Raymond Cruz earlier. He was in Out for Justice in a pretty prominent role. But not necessarily sharing scenes with them. I met Robert Lasardo years ago at a convention. And
cool.
He didn't have anything bad to say. He was just like, yeah, his movies are just stellar. Just one of a kind. I never kept up with his personal life or what was up in the tabloids. And I'm like, well, that's okay.
I like Robert Lasardo. He's cool.
Yeah, he's
one of the best. I mean, he's typecast. He's always generally playing the same character, but he's very, he's great. There's not really many people as good and convincing at playing the kind of characters that he plays, apart from like Danny Trejo and stuff, I guess. But,
speaking of, there you go, Trejo. There's another one.
Trejo's been in 3 films that Seagal did. Unfortunately, when Trejo
and Urban Justice. So what's the third
one? Machete.
Oh, well, dope. I keep forgetting he's in that because there's just so many other personas. But yeah, so there you go. This is like, there's a guy who just basically...
he usually gets beaten up by Seagal and actually got beaten up by Seagal in Marks for Death. They were sort of a bit... They were kind of pally in Urban Justice, but obviously... arch nemesis kind of situation in Machete. I loved that. I thought it was great. And, Seagal doesn't normally die in his movies apart from, say, Executive Decision. So that was pretty cool.
Do you consider Executive Decision the true Under Siege Part 3?
Well, I think...
Or Flight of Fury is the better one.
Well, no, I think Half Past Dead is basically the sort of proxy Under Siege 3, because it's the closest in terms of they've gone for that sort of Die Hardish kind of setting. So instead of so it was on a military vessel, then on a train, and then Half Past Dead is in a prison. And yes, True. There's the other all the other elements in it, but it's got the same thing. I mean, in Under Siege, he teams up with all the crew to take down. It's not just a one-man army kind of thing. He basically lets them all out, and then they all assault the bad guys together. Towards the end of the movie, they're all like, "We'll follow you, Casey," and it's and he's like, in Half Past Dead, it's him kind of leading the inmates who are given access to high-powered weaponry for some reason.
That makes better sense.
You would say.
Yeah, because I
But
mean,
yeah, it's got and also you had the sidekick from Under Siege 2 became the villain of Half Past Dead. So it's like, it's all, I mean, there's that connection there as well. You know, they've even got a casting link. Although, funnily enough, you know, you can look at Half Past Dead and say it's kind of an Under Siege 3. It's also kind of The Rock, you know, as many people have observed. It's got a lot of similarities to The Rock, although it's a lot more muddled and sort of childish, not quite the same word, but, you know, sort of juvenile.
It's pretty petulant,
you know,
but I think everyone knew what they were making.
Oh yeah, I think it's quite fun. I mean, it's got some terrible doubling. I mean, there's like, I think Seagal's got 3 fight scenes, and you know, the doubling's all really obvious in that.
And even other movies by franchise from that same year, like even Ballistic X versus Sever and a few of those other spy movies they did, kind of they feel like they were, you know, kind of meant to be vehicles for Seagal in some way. I've even seen critics compare them to James Bond films or other action vehicles that Van Damme and Seagal were working on. So it's like, it could have basically fitted any of those personas that those people wanted to work with. But yeah, it was kind of just where, once again, just DVD was becoming a new thing, and a lot of movies that studios didn't have any faith in would often just get dumped to video through Lionsgate or Sony. And it is kind of interesting how, yes, it is like, it feels like a Jerry Bruckheimer vehicle, and after Executive Decision, you know, Joe Silver stops working with them, and you don't know if he just had a persona clash with them or didn't like all the other complaints he heard. But yeah, I mean, they pretty much do follow that whole trend. Even parts of Submerged definitely have kind of a rock feel.
Yeah, well, and the other thing about Submerged, so sort of like you mentioned it, Submerged is made by New Image, Millennium Films, Millennium Pictures, or whatever. They've changed the name over the years. But the central concept of Submerged is very similar to the Expendables, which they would make. You know, the same company made. You know, about 5 years later. Yeah. You know, it's instead of the action hero leading a bunch of former action stars, it's the action hero leading half the cast of Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, including Vinnie Jones and a few of the others. I don't know why they particularly cast all those guys, but that sort of gives a, you know,
I thought Vinny would have been perfect in the Expendables, but yeah, it seems like after it pretty much was a role reversal. It's like then he does all these other movies that kind of both predate and could have easily been Expendables type movies, like Mercenary for Justice and.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he starts to do these team leader. He likes. I mean, it starts, I guess, with Executive Decision of him playing this team leader, and then that became kind of the thing that he lent on, and that was the whole concept. That was the whole basis of the entire True Justice TV series of, you know, he was kind of the leader of this group and they all go out and do the legwork, and then he comes in and sort of slaps someone at the end and sort of takes the glory. But and then you go from that to the later films where you've got the actual proxies of the, you know, they literally cast someone to do the legwork. So instead of having them sort of team up with someone, it's like, okay, I'll go off screen. Now we're going to follow this guy and he's going to do the fight scenes and stuff. And then we'll come back and you kind of end up with the plot following too. So to talk about Half Past Dead, a few years later, he then does Maximum Conviction, which is almost, because he didn't do Half Past Dead 2, which is interesting, but he did do Maximum Conviction, which is almost like a Half Past Dead film because that's also set in a prison, but that was him and Steve Austin. But instead of, you know, they're not really teamed up. It's kind of, you follow Seagal for a bit, you're following Steve Austin, and then you got this other guy, Bren Foster, and you're also following him. And he was in the
later movie that they Rames do. But yeah,
The Force of Execution.
Was this a prequel movie for his character? Yeah.
Well, so Maximum Conviction is kind of like, it's like when a Half Past Dead 2 came out with Bill Goldberg and Corrupt. It was quite, you know, it didn't do much for me. It was quite forgettable. Although, yeah, I like Bill Goldberg, but I I was glad when he did. I didn't love Maximum Conviction. I'll be honest. It's not great. It's not particularly good. But I was glad that he kind of revisited that kind of prison setting.
I'm with you. It's pretty much his leftovers, what he kind of wanted to do had he stuck with the Half Past Dead franchise. But yeah, I mean, Half Past Dead 2, it was watchable, but even by Art Camacho's, who's taken over the whole standards. And here's another connection. Robert Lasardo is the main, tertiary villain in that once you get past the crooked prison, riot guys and the other guys. But yeah, I mean, he said he had fun working on that. But yeah, I mean, like to say, I mean, it could have literally just been titled anything and probably been way more successful. And it just needed to be more campy. And it is wild because Goldberg for himself kind of seemed like he wanted to kind of have a kind of direct-to-video career, kind of like Snipes or Seagal, and just kind of just stopped. He just pretty much just went wherever he was wanted or needed to be an intimidating guy or a prison guard. But it seems like Maximum Conviction was basically an attempt at also just making Seagal just attempt to stay relevant in the direct-to-video world. And when I talked to Keanu Waxman, he said basically he likened him to John Wayne, who you basically have to play to his persona, and basically Seagal gets along with him because he gives him a reason to just give a speech while he's staying seated. Yeah. And then the rest basically writes itself. And it's like, I can totally understand you, Keanu, because right now you kind of want to be working with the kind of people who Isaac Florentine or some of the other action guys who are out there right now are working on.
Jesse Johnson.
Yes, that's who I was trying to think. Yes, Jesse V. Johnson is hot shit right now. And Keanu, he's pretty good at coming up with scripts, and he can work it in and come in on time. And like you say, I think this movie just struggles because you kind of want it to be more of a vehicle for Stone Cold, when he was just fresh off the Expendables and now trying to do an action movie star before going to reality TV. And they don't really make good on that. They just kind of say, well, they're here together. So.
Yeah, and I think he did that. He did Hunt to Kill with Keanu Waxman around the same time, I think, as this. And yes. I thought Hunt to Kill was really good, and I think that's another. I mean, that was kind of an Expendables sort of spin-off in its own way, because that was it had Eric Roberts, I think Gary Daniels, who were both in Expendables with him.
I'm surprised he got Daniels back after Submerged, because he basically got face planted and didn't get to do much in the fight scene.
No, that was real. I mean, that was great seeing him in. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love Submerged. It was like, wow, Gary Daniels is in this, and then big disappointment with the fight scene. But always good, always a pleasure to see him. Actually, Ross McCall was in the was with Gary Daniels in a lot of his scenes in that movie, and he's just made his. This is a tangent, by the way. He's just made his directorial debut, a film called A Violent Man with Craig Fairbrass. That's a prison movie, coincidentally, but like a gritty drama, basically. But that's really good. I quite like Ross McCall. He was good in. He's quite good in that little role that he kind of becomes an antagonist. I think Vinnie Jones beats the hell out of him when he's trying to assassinate someone in Submerged, and that. So he's British, isn't he, or an English actor? Yeah, he's Scottish. Yeah, but he plays a lot of American characters. I think he's quite praised for doing quite a decent American accent, according to what I've read online. I thought he's quite good. He's always been more of a character actor than sort of a lead, but he's done. Yep. He made a film with Jesse Johnson called The Beautiful Ones. He's done a couple of films, but never been released over here. So I've never here in the UK. So I've never seen it. It was acceptable, but far from Johnson, I think's best. I prefer a lot of his other vigilante films that he did, but that was their basic attempt at doing like a noir detective private eye movie, and it was black and white, wasn't it? Kind of, from what I recall, and some scenes definitely were, and right. But yeah, Ross has been on a bunch of stuff, Band of Brothers, 24, and just that's it. Yeah, trucking out a bunch of, like you say, just sees a supporting role. But
I mean, even Joe Bellows was really good in Hunt to Kill. I mean, he's just chewing the scenery, and like many Canadian productions, it makes good of the outdoor scenery and uses that as a character in and of itself.
Yeah, it's got that kind of, I mean, yeah, it's got that kind of, I can't remember what it was called. I think it was Shoot to Kill. I mean, it's Deadly Pursuit over here, the old Tom Berenger, Sidney Poitier movie.
Yes.
That's the one I always think of. And then, but Hunt to Kill's got that whole thing. I mean, he's got the quad bike, and he's like crashing into, blows up the quad bike or something, or smashes it into something. It's really good. There's some good scenes in that. I would rewatch it. I think that's one of Keanu's better films.
I like to think that Stone Cold could have had his own universe with that, The Stranger, and a bunch of the other ones that he was like fighting.
Well, he also did. I mean, he did the package with
Dolph,
Johnson,
and Johnson,
and Dolph was in that, and that was written by, and this, I think Sean and I talked about this.
Derek Colston.
Written by Derek Colston, and he's playing a character called Wick. So it's almost like he's a relative of John Wick. It's like
somehow.
It's kind of like a universe. It's kind of like part of the. It would have been really funny if they'd have kind of tied that in somehow. Maybe if Steve Austin turned up in John Wick 4 as Tommy Wick, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, technically, Colston would own the writing, the script rights, and so I don't think he would need Kaufman or Johnson's permission, and I think they're all by Lionsgate. So yeah, I think he could totally, if he wanted to. He likely won't, but it'd be fun if he did. Yeah, have one in the chamber and the package just somehow integrate together. Yeah. And if they are part of the same universe, then Dolph is technically playing two different characters there.
Right. So I am going to move us on to his environmental trilogy, because we talked about Under Siege and where that took us. So following the initial success of Under Siege, before he's done Under Siege 2, probably the reason that he ended up doing Under Siege 2 was On Deadly Ground, which we mentioned before, which was Seagal going full Seagal. There's no holding back. He's like, he deviates from what everyone's expected of him so far, which is to be just that guy with the ponytail and the gun. And now he's trying to save the environment, and he's going to try and save the environment by blowing it up.
Yep. It's so not contradicting in any way, shape, or form.
but that's why I love. That's why I think is that's the pattern of Seagal. The Seagal himself and Seagal in the movies, everything's a contradiction. Saying like I'm not a violent guy. I'm not going to be violent at all, and then like slitting people's throats. So I mean, he's mercilessly killing the quite innocent workers. I mean, some of them seem to be quite innocent workers at the Aegis 1 oil plant, and he's just like, putting a silencer together and blowing the guy's head off for just trying to answer the door. It's like the guy doesn't even get a chance to attack him or anything. Right. And this is a heroic action, apparently. So it's it was kind of ahead of its time in a way. I've kind of in some senses I've likened it to sort of like, so later on when Warner Brothers would do The Matrix, if you look at The Matrix in a certain way, it's kind of about terrorism. And then if you look at On Deadly Ground, it's kind of the same thing. It's like you're following these heroes, but what they're doing is actually terrorism.
Yeah, they had plenty of other assassination thrillers or Clint Eastwood type movies that would often involve political president, scandals, and like you say, overseas mayhem caused by freedom fighters or terrorism. And I think, On Deadly Ground, I think they were liking the numbers, and so I have no doubt that they, in some capacity, were just seeing what was going on. But it's the
hero. That's the thing. It's the hero doing the terrorism.
He is the terrorist.
It's like you're not. It's not played that way. But then when you watch it, you're like, no, he's blowing up an oil refinery to because of his belief that it's the bad thing.
Literally, all he had to do is kill John C. McGinley, and the rest could have just taken off, or he could have had them arrested. But it's like he's more of a anti-hero in Fire Down Below and The Patriot, not to be confused with the Mel Gibson movie. And it's just like, but here, he's practically instigating the whole deal. Even when he does that whole bar fight, he literally almost kills the guy. This is like, all you had to do was bitch slap him and tell him don't come back. That's all you had to do, and he wants to go the whole 9 yards.
Well, and he has that whole fight, and they show it in slow motion. He literally beats up an old man in that scene. He's like throws this old guy around. He's got no mercy. This is a tip of, again, this is kind of a trait throughout his career of him him saying that he cares for people or whatever, and then really being very selfish and just not his characters are just not very I can't think of the word now, but compassionate. He's not a very compassionate person. In Mercenary for Justice, for example, he's doing this bank robbery thing, and he's just mowing down security guards. The poor security guards who are trying to work in the bank. They've not done anything wrong.
Yeah,
and he kind of did the. He did that a bit on Deadly Ground, which obviously we've got. You mentioned John C. McGinley, who's great. Joan Chen, Michael Caine, obviously Billy Bob Thornton's in there, and Arlie Ermey, fantastic, gets to do the big speech about how badass is Seagal's character Forrest Taft.
Fun fact: John C. McGinley and a bunch of others later debunked that Seagal didn't really do so much directing rather than making suggestions and telling the cinematographer Rick White, whose credits include 48 Hours, and also ordering Stallone around on the movie Cobra, which he was already, having the director be a ghost director. So basically, Seagal was a ghost director, Rick White directed it, and Michael Caine actually he didn't think it was a good movie, but he actually said he didn't have any problems working with anyone on set, unlike, Jaws the Revenge, where he's like, oh, that whole thing was a mess.
Yeah, even in his autobiography, he sort of goes, "Oh, isn't it crazy that my career sort of I ended up making a film with Steven Seagal?" But he kind of just left it at that. He didn't really go into any detail, disappointingly for me.
He's really not even in it all that much, other than the boardroom scenes and the final confrontation. So yeah.
Yeah, and he's got that. He's doing his dodgy. For me, I don't know how you feel about it, but for me, his American accent is pretty bad, and I wish he was just playing it as English, to be honest.
It's bad, but it kind of adds the appeal. And like you say, the movie's scripting makes no sense, despite its explosions being magnificent and it just being such a hoot. This also,
yeah. Oh, I love just Michael Caine. I love his when he does that advert, the commercial that he's doing for Aegis Oil. And he's got the caribou and stuff, and they cut, and he's doing this weak hair, Aegis Oil weak hair, and then they do cut, and he goes, "Get these things away from me," and he's like cursing and stuff, and I just love that scene.
It's a hysterical scene, and technically there is another guy here who's been with him 3 different times, and that was Michael J. White. This was back when he was a stuntman, and he's one of the guys who gets clobbered to death, with his shotgun, and he's later again with him in Exit Wounds and The Perfect Weapon. No relation.
See, I did not know that. I didn't know he'd worked on this. I know, Michael J. White was pretty active. He wasn't very high profile at that point, but because he hadn't sort of broken out with Spawn yet. Although it was just after this, I think.
Yeah, four years later. And
was it 4 years later? Jesus, I thought it was.
Yeah. He was mainly just popping up in karate movies that were direct to video or made for TV, and brief
I know he did I think it was like a Ring of Fire movie with Don Wilson, and I think he might have been in Ring of Fire 3, and I love Michael J. White. He's great, and it was fantastic. He turned up in obviously Exit Wounds, as you say, and
he still claims
Asian Connection. He gets he gets that top billing or high billing in Asian Connection, but he literally only appears in the opening scene. Which is really annoying.
He said it was an easy payday on Twitter. He was just like, I literally come into a room and do nothing. And going back to your Seagal as a terrorist motive, practically what he does in both The Glimmer Man and Driven to Kill, just 2 violent serial killer movies, where it's just like, he's not even an anti-hero anymore. He's just a guy going around and just practically just eliminating just everything he sees. And it's like, dude, you didn't even read them their rights or even tell them what they did wrong. It's a guy to do. Breaking someone's tooth and then walking away is like, come on. Get real here.
So moving on for the second film in this particular trilogy, which follows on. So he was previously trying to save the environment in Alaska. Now he's trying to save the environment in Appalachia.
Appalachia of all places.
Yeah. Again, fantastic cast. This one brings in Seagal. So Seagal's brought in. I mean, we didn't mention on Deadly Ground, obviously, because there's the whole spiritual thing that happens.
Right.
The first part of the film is. So in this one, he brings in his love of country music. Or music in general, and he gets to play the guitar. He clearly called in pretty much every musician that he could get his hands on. Who maybe they were friends with him or something. I don't know. But his music career, because he hadn't released an album at this point, but he had started writing songs and putting songs on soundtracks, like Marked for Death. He did one, and on Under Siege 2, he was involved in the song at the end. This one, he wrote quite a few songs for, and he also has Harry Dean Stanton, who's a brilliant character actor and a musician. And you got
of all people to perform with, and Stephen Lang years before Avatar, so just fresh off
Stephen Lang's in there.
Tombstone.
Livon Helms and Randy Travis.
Mark Helgenberger, years before CSI, is the love interest. Chris Christopherson Michael Caine.
Who's a Marty something? I can't remember his name. He's a country singers aren't so well known over here. So I can't remember, but he performs in the film and on the soundtrack. Taj Mahal did one or two of the songs with Seagal, but he sings them. So if you get one of Steven Seagal's films albums later, he sings one of the songs that Taj Mahal sang in Fire Down Below.
Oh wow!
So it's kind of like.
Did they release a soundtrack to this?
Oh yeah, I've got the soundtrack. Yeah, but Seagal doesn't get to sing on the soundtrack. So it's only Seagal only got to sing later when he got songs from the Crystal Cave and Mojo Priest. And I think it was Mojo Priest that the song from. I think it was Love Doctor. No, not Love Doctor. I can't remember. I'm terrible. I should know. But yeah, I've got the soundtrack, and I did. I used to listen to it all the time. I haven't listened to it recently, so the name escapes me. But I really like the soundtrack to Fire Down Below. I think it's a lot of fun, and I do like the film a lot.
Silvestri, who did the soundtrack or someone like that.
Let me just check music. Well, Fire Down Below, the music was by Nick Lenny Smith, who I'm not familiar with actually.
Okay, yeah, he scored The Rock as well as, I think, Less Than Mohicans. So he did a lot of those awesome blockbusters. Yeah, I'm with you. It is a watchable movie. It's just one of those Seagal's persona, ego is so large that kind of detracts from what could otherwise be kind of a easy to watch movie. And I think it helps that Jeb Stewart, one of the co-writers of The Fugitive and the original Die Hard, had some decent action set pieces that for them to bring to life.
Yeah, the problem is some of it's just, like the fight scenes or whatever, they're shot really badly. Like there's this whole sort of shaky thing. I mean, this was before shaky cam became like a big thing that everyone was using. This was like shaky cam, like proto shaky cam, I guess, shaky cam. Because that was one of the things I didn't like about the film because I wasn't a fan. This was the first direct-to-video Steven Seagal film in the UK.
Oh, really?
It didn't get a cinema release.
The Patriot went straight to HBO, and so this one was like the first to go direct to video overseas. So we got this one, and then over here, the Patriot did the same thing. It went to a TV station first, and then it came out via Sony. And I think that was the start of his Andrew Stevens contract, if I'm not mistaken. I think El Samaha co-produced it.
Oh yeah, I think you might be. I think you're right there. Just I'm going to look at the credits, see if I can see his name.
And fun fact: David Ayer. That's right, the creator of movies like Street Kings, End of Watch, and Training Day. Apparently, was one of the co-writers on that, and it's believed that he's one of the credited writers under a different alias. He was not a fan of what he was being asked to write, let alone who they were going with, to where he was just like, yeah, screw it. It's just a mercenary job.
Yeah. So so I've warmed to Fire Down Below over the years, and because of the soundtrack and because of the personality stuff, I really like that. I just think it's got this really distinct flavor to it. The action, some of it's not so good. The plotting is kind of a bit all over the place because it kind of it does well. It's got its main plot, and then it's got all the whole Mark Hellenberger. It's got a big romance plot, which is really unusual for a Seagal movie.
Right.
It's like
it's not, doesn't have that in his range, let alone persona. No. So it's just
But what's good about it is that Mark Hellenberger is age appropriate. His most love interests in Seagal's films, as he gets older, are really, really young. So it's a really suitable romance. I mean, does it come off not so great? But I think it works in their relationship, and it's corny and it's silly, and Seagal's walking around in Appalachia in his massive coats and stuff. Which are completely he's supposed to be a handyman, and he's turning up to people's houses and he's looking really he's like really dressed up, but he needless to say Chris Christopherson is the big bad in that one, another great actor, great musician.
He kind of steals his own scenes to where you kind of forget whoever else is in there. You almost expect Willie Nelson to come in being casino security, and
exactly. In this movie, if Willie Nelson was in anything, he should have been in Fire Down Below. Absolutely,
he totally should have. He should have been one of the bandits trying to kill him or something. But yeah, I mean, Felix Alcala, I think, does pretty good. He's a former cinematographer turned TV director whose works include Battlestar Galactica and Criminal Minds, and I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was at this point where he's like, hey, it's my attempt at doing, big screen movies outside of TV. And I just don't think it worked out because, like you say, he's having to deal with his persona. And I'm sure Christopherson was his own kind of hippie, larger-than-life persona. So, yeah, I think he had to just make sure everyone was getting along with each other.
And I think there must have been a longer cut, because I believe that the whole first act was essentially cut and truncated into that. Into flashbacks of.
I wouldn't doubt it. It definitely feels Speedy Gonzalez or like a studio head came in and maybe they were the ones who chopped some of the fight scenes to say, hey, if it goes on too long or risk getting an X rating, because how Seagal likes to film his brutal fight scenes, we gotta delete it.
And but yeah, so I like that. And then so we move on to The Patriot, which you mentioned. This actually didn't do well. It's not a popular film. Most people don't like it because it really went against the grain in that it doesn't really have any action. It's got like a couple of very brief fight scenes or whatever.
This is his outbreak.
Quite jarring. This is his outbreak, and he was trying to move away from action. And I don't really blame him. I actually quite like the fact he's tried to make it fun. He's essentially making this film. It was shot on his own ranch. In Montana.
Was it really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, reportedly. I mean, everything I've read has said that's what the case was. That he shot it around where he was living at the time. He was trying to be more of a cowboy, which he hadn't really done before, but still sort of touching on very familiar themes of, the indigenous people of the area, and him associating himself to that culture. And
it's a wild predicament. He was playing a half Native American guy in Deadly Ground, and now he's back here and he's like, well, I'm not a Native American, but I know their cause, I know who they are, so I must defend them.
Yeah, and his wife in the film, he's a widower. His wife was a Native American, and so he goes to his sister-in-law. He gets his sister-in-law to help out, and there's a whole. It is very. If anything, it's not so similar to Fire Down Below. It's very similar to On Deadly Ground, but the difference is On Deadly Ground was packed with action. So much action, so much hard-hitting action. I mean, even with the side characters and stuff. So Sven-Ole Thorsen, using the ivory to smash up. And John C. McGinley with the clamp as well. Or the pipe cutter with the poor old guy who's Steven Seagal's friend in that movie. And this one kind of does a similar. So you got the old in On Deadly Ground. Steven Seagal had this old guy who was his friend, and and in this one he's got L.Q. Jones, classic Western actor.
Of all people,
Western movie. Yeah, and he's kind of It's his employee basically, but he's like helping around. He's looking after the kids and the kid's daughter and everything. Camilla Bell's in there, you know, in one of her early roles. You know, she goes on to be a leading actress. I haven't seen her around much now, but you know, she did like 10,000 BC and I think it was When a Stranger Calls remake.
Yeah, Camille pops up here and there. This was pretty much after she had just played the girl who gets killed at the beginning of the Lost World Jurassic Park. So I mean,
yes, absolutely, yeah. So get eaten by those little dinosaurs. The
the copies.
Galen Sartain is the bad guy. So this is militia kind of thing, and that's quite an interesting setup because Seagal's kind of a pro-militia kind of guy. I would say. He's certainly anti-government in a lot of things. So he even says in the movie, he has a line where he says, "I'm not against these guys. I actually think some of what they do is quite good and whatever." But in this case, you know, releasing the deadly biological weapon was just pushing it.
It's wild how it introduces politics, and yet no one really even discusses the politics. The movie's just that forgettable, and like you say, I mean, On Deadly Ground has the outrageous kills, and it's just such a hoot. And you know, Fire Down Below is at least watchable despite the poorly done fight scenes and a little dull romance. And it's just like, but yeah, this one, it could have been a very interesting thriller. It could have even maybe been an episode of primetime TV. And it's just really the only thing remarkable about it is that everyone would keep, anytime it came on TNT on occasion in the early morning hours, everyone would, you know, all my TV guides or digital recorders would always misinterpret it as a reshowing of Mel Gibson's The Patriot. It's like, it's not the Mel Gibson movie. It's a Seagal movie that's by Disney of all things.
And it's also got what's great about one of the things I really like about it. I mean, the plot is ridiculous. I mean, he's supposed to be a former government biological weapons guy who's warned the government about this biological weapon, and this particular biological weapon, just after he's had a phone call or whatever from someone worried about it, it literally turns up in the very, very small town that he was, and there's no way they would have known that it was coming to his town, or it's like the biggest coincidence in the world.
Right.
That it just so happens.
And if he was a government worker,
of all the places, like in the entire United States,
and if he was a government, and if he was a government worker, why would he be pro-militia? It's just like, like you say, just very sketchy background and just bizarre circumstances to where it's like, okay, so I mean, it's like he's trying to emulate an even more implausible version of a Irwin Allen disaster movie. You're like, okay. You just want to go from point A to point B and not really make sure that it all connects the dots, you know?
I think it's really great. It's got really great cinematography. The film is directed by another former cinematographer, Dean Semler, who only directed 2 films. He directed this and Firestorm with Howie Long, both of which are favourites of mine. I loved Firestorm back in the day. That's another film with a really good cast. They're both about 80 minutes long, very, you know, but that's got a lot more. That is much more action driven. William Forsythe being the villain and stuff in that one. So Firestorm, I think Firestorm's great. So The Patriot, very unusual. It's kind of after this point, he kind of realizes that he can't do a film where he's like, the producers basically, you know, they say, if we're going to make a film with you, there has to be a certain amount of action in it. Right. Although this was an independently made film, you know, nobody wanted to buy it, nobody wanted to show it and stuff. He sneakily shoots a guy, and then the rest of the time is him fighting a guy with a bomb or some shit, and his stunt double kicks him outside of a moving car or something like that. I don't really remember. Well, after this one, it was kind of it was a couple of years later. I think he might have done Ticker first, but it was you know, he gets back with Joel Silver. Or he gets with, I can't remember. He made films with Joel Silver.
It's someone else. That was.
He made Exit Wounds. Wounds.
Yes, that was Joel
He gets his big comeback opportunity, and they say, right, okay, you got to lose the weight. You're gonna have to do the action. Okay, wire work's a thing now, so we're gonna have to suspend you on some wires and stuff. And that doesn't work really. But you know, that was another film where, you know, they kind of leveraged him with DMX, and it actually kind of worked. And that was a a film that followed Steven Seagal, but it also followed DMX. So DMX he wasn't an incidental character. He became like the second lead, like official, like properly, and the film kind of moved between the two of them and stuff. And that was more of a success, but still not quite enough to sort of keep his career on track, because then he does Half Past Dead, which is a big step down. And anyway, but that environmental trilogy, it's interesting that the environmental films were consigned to the 90s. That was kind of it. Between like, what was it, 94, 90, hang on, what was it, 94, 97 or something, when he 98, I think he did The Patriot.
Yeah.
So yeah, within a space of about 5 years, he's kind of had his chance to say everything he wants about the environment, and he kind of moves on. He doesn't have the leverage after this to really push any particular themes that he's personally interested in. So the themes, the sort of unofficial franchises or official franchises, become things of which he has less control over. And so the next, I mean, if you're looking at sort of unofficially associated thing, the next thing becomes rappers. You know, he's kind of, you got the, you know, Exit Wounds, Half Past Dead, Ticker is sort of at the side because Nas was in that, but they didn't really have any scenes together. And then Today You Die, which again is a complete mess of a film, but I have a real soft spot for it. And there's some stuff I really like in it.
It was another Millennium Films joint, and it felt like, he was trying to claim that same kind of Glimmerman, Exit Wounds kind of deal by putting in Treach, and then just kind of doing what he had done in his earlier works, like Out for Justice and Marked for Death, where he's just going to go around. He used to work for the CIA. He's been framed. He just break out of prison. Oh man.
Well, in Today You Die, this brings back the spiritual themes of that he's taken yes. On Daily Grind, where because there's his wife is like psychic or something, I think, and you know there's this whole supernatural dimension to the film, which kind of then got mixed up and sort of sidelined with this other plot in the film. So the supernatural stuff is never really fully developed, and it kind of comes in and comes and goes, and he's like, the magical things are appearing on the floor and stuff. I don't know. It's really strange. The bad guy seems to be, at one point they're talking about him like he's one character, but when you meet him, he's actually a very different character. Like like they change things partway through. It's like Kevin. I can't remember his name, but the villain in Today You Die. I think he was in Roadhouse as well. I think it's Kevin Teague. I might be wrong.
I think he was in this somewhere.
But there's all this like, you ever dance with the devilish sort of kind of conversations they're having. It's like that sort of weird supernatural sort of candles. I'm doing deals with the devil. You know, I've signed a pact with the devil sort of stuff going on in that film. But the rest of it is kind of buddy, you know, action, taking, you know, corrupt.
He even slugs a bit unknown Randy Couture in there as well.
Yeah. Well, and Chloe Grace Moretz is the little girl who, because they're trying to save a hospital. Well, they don't develop it, but the theme is that the little girl is in danger from Kevin Teague's villain. He's got like a photo. The plot is not developed. It's almost like he's trying to do something to the girl or get hold of her or to perform a ritual or something, but they never took it that far. So at the end, he's kind of, they're kind of like, hey, everything's okay with you now. It's great. It was like, but we never even, you know, we never really established with her why she was a character. So there's kind of a conclusion to a different film there. But
I'm
that's
sure
Chloe Grace
he demanded that they cut it out in any way, shape, or form. He's like, nope, it's got to be just me. But the next thing that kind of happens with him is he starts making films, not consistently, but films that develop the Asian themes. So he became
well established as, you know, his backstory was that he was an American in Japan, and he ran an Aikido dojo.
Right.
Things have become muddled, and what the truth is about, you know, whether it was his dojo or he just kind of assisted in the dojo, or, you know, it was his wife's, whatever it is, we don't know. But that was the part of the mythology of Steven Seagal was, you know, he had I was in Japan for a long time. I also did some stuff with the CIA, and they kind of tried to blend that into the, you know, blur the lines between what was it in the movies was kind of autobiographical in a sense. And he does this movie, Belly of the Beast, which brings in the like so many of his films, he's ex-CIA, you know, doing some jobs on the side and stuff, but they bring in all this weird supernatural stuff into that film.
Yeah,
you know, there's literally well, there's literally monks and basically a voodoo bad guy. Sort of the bad guy has voodoo on his side, and he has chanting monks on his side, and that's that develops through the film. And by the time you come to the end, it's not just the hero versus the villain. It's not just a typical climate. They've got these literal supernatural forces supporting them both. It's like one versus another, good versus evil kind of themes going on. What is basically they've kidnapped my daughter story, and him teaming up with Byron Mann as his former colleague who's become a monk, and they're going, you know, he's assisting him in his journey, and they're in Thailand. But what's interesting is it's much more of a kung fu movie. It's, you know, it's a Chinese or, you know, Hong Kong kind of film. They've got
Ryan Mann, who shows up later in his John Alexander trilogy.
Yes, he does. Yes. So we've got Tony Ching Su Tong, who's probably one of the most noted directors that Seagal's worked with. Because it's interesting because, you know, Van Damme did films. You know, he brought Ringo Lam and Choi Hark and John Woo, and Steven Seagal never worked with any of those guys. But later on, you know, for whatever reason, Ching Su Tong ends up doing a film with Steven Seagal, which ends up being developing that side of Steven Seagal, you know, backstory, as it were, of, you know, him being, you know, the Buddhist, and, you know, it's a film that gives him an opportunity to walk around in robes and go to temples and stuff, but also gets him doing different kinds of fights in different kinds of situations than he's really done before. So Belly of the Beast is just as crazy as some of the films he's done before, but it's got a really distinct quality. Well, I feel, you know, it's got quite distinct qualities to it that make it stand out, and the director is sort of a key reason for that. And you know, having Byron Mann there is great because he's a very good martial artist himself. As you said, he does later reteam with Seagal. Actually, I think he's reteamed with him a couple of times because he was the villain in A Dangerous Man as well. So that's another example of a relationship that, you know, like Vinnie Jones in Submerged. You know, Vinnie Jones ended up being in the later Alexander film as well, and as well as Gutshot Straight, and I don't know if there was a fourth one, I can't remember, but anyway. So Belly of the Beast is the first one that kind of puts Seagal in Asia, in this case in Thailand.
It was one of those, it was just constantly on, just as a midnight movie on USA Network, so I always got it mixed up with Out for a Kill and even Out of Reach. And, you know, they were just go-to movies on USA or Spike TV. And like you, you know, if you can get past the obvious, you know, stunt doubles, they just don't do a good job of hiding it, and you can have fun with it. And it really only kind of just gets tiresome near the end when they're doing a CGI bullet, you know, battle. And but it's way better than The Foreigner, which we're about to get into. That was his attempt.
Yeah, once I've finished off talking about these, and then these Asian ones, and we'll get on to The Foreigner. We should have probably gone to The foreigner.
No, it's fine.
Earlier,
I mean,
sorry, I've circumvented that.
It all becomes muddled after a while. But
yeah.
I mean, Shadow Man, out of all his other spy and just kind of movies, this is at least his attempt at doing an Art of War kind of movie. And, you know, Shadow Man was kind of his version of doing a version of like Ronin or MacGyver, where he blows up a giant helicopter and attack force, which is just like a crazy, just incomprehensible mess. That was kind of like the hit.
Well, that was a film that was supposed to be about aliens that they ended up saying, actually, we don't want them to be aliens. So they're going to be people who are on a drug. It just makes no sense because their eyes are going all weird and stuff. It's like, no, it's like a Species knockoff. But then they're saying, oh, no, actually, it's like, we've invented
not a Body Snatchers movie, but it's a Body Snatchers movie.
They're talking about like things like Majestic 12 or whatever, which is all from like linked to, you know, I don't know if it's linked to Area 51, but it's that whole, you know, that alien UFO sort of conspiracy theories and stuff. And they've got a CTX and whatever, and then they try to say, oh, actually CTX is a drug and stuff. But anyway, so so Belly of the Beast very shortly is followed by Into the Sun, which I'd argue is one of the highlights of this period, because it was shot in Japan. It's got a really interesting location, you know, shot on location, not just Japan. They shot it in Thailand as well, a bit like Belly of the Beast, but it's got some really interesting locations. Again, some quite decent supporting cast. A lot of them are local actors, a lot of Japanese. I mean, if you know Japanese cinema, which I'm not about, I don't know a lot about Japanese cinema, but there's, as Vern points out in his book, you know, there's lots of people from many classic films appearing in small roles in it, as well as the actress who played Gogo Yubari from Kill Bill, who has like a pointless appearance. I don't even know why she's in it, but she appears in it at the start. You've got William Atherton from Ghostbusters and various things is in there as well. And that's a film that Seagal got to go back to Japan, you know, apparently shot some scenes where he used to live. So he knew the area. He hadn't spoken Japanese for quite a while, but he got to indulge his love for the Japanese culture, and that sort of permeates the film. And it's as much, it is light on action, but some of the action is really solid and brutal, and a bit of it's, you know, there's lots of sword fighting action, which he hadn't really done much of since he had a sword fight in like Marked for Death. You got any particular thoughts or feelings about Into the Sun?
I'm with you. It's a fun, straightforward movie that, you know, once you get past his ego, it's pretty bearable movie. It's basically a modern day Black Rain kind of movie with a bit of, you know, Yahimbo gangs playing each other, and he's the foreign operative who's in the thick of it. And fun fact, Mink, you know, was a British director who did a bunch of music videos and commercials, as well as a movie star around the same time with Exhibit and Busta Rhymes. He was, as a result of this, he was briefly optioned to be to helm the upcoming Mortal Kombat reboot at that time that was supposed to come out around 2007 but never did.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't even know he was British, because I don't really know much about Mink. I mean, yeah, he does bring sort of an interesting style to the film. It's kind of a, you know, it's very much about old-fashioned kind of, I mean, the whole film is kind of like the young upstarts, but, you know, there's tradition versus, you know, contemporary. So it's like the old versus the new and stuff. And so you've got all these old, themes and styles, but then you've got these flashy visuals and sort of music video-ish stuff thrown in. You've got Don Fauntleroy was the cinematographer again on that one. So I think you're right. I think he's done like 5 films in one capacity or another with Seagal, whether it's as director or cinematographer. The film also features a lot of Seagal's songs. So songs from the Crystal Cave is basically the soundtrack to Into the Sun, but I actually really like a lot of the song, and the song at the end. There's kind of a guitar ballad song that Seagal has that plays on the end credits. I think that fits the film really nicely. There's like you hear other songs of his from the album, which was like a world music kind of thing. It's got some reggae and again, which he did reggae with. He did that in Marked for Death as well. But so there's a lot of Seagal in Into the Sun for the first time. I mean, more than because Belly of the Beast is kind of a film that doesn't really fit him. He's in it, and it does develop the Asian themes and the Buddhism and stuff, but it's a different kind of movie. Whereas Into the Sun it's that out for justice kind of Seagal, that hard to kill kind of Seagal, where he's kind of more of a he's I'm having trouble articulating. It just sort of fits his persona better. So it's more of a typical Seagal. It feels more like a Seagal film than Belly of the Beast does, although I do love Belly of the Beast.
Funny,
and then it was but it was a long time after. It was a long time after Into the Sun, and only recently that he sort of went back to that territory to make Attrition. And Attrition comes many years like more than 10 years, I think, after Into the Sun. And it's because Into the Sun was 2004, I think, or 2005. And then Attrition is that was 2018. 04, yeah. So you're talking 14 years later. But curiously, it's kind of Attrition is a bit more like a Belly of the Beast because it's kind of going back to a kung fu movie-ish kind of thing.
Right. He claimed that if it wasn't a theatrical hit, he would, go back to making direct-to-video movies. So basically, that's just that this one was pretty much only seen in like South Korea.
Yeah, well, Attrition's never been released in the UK. It was the reason I got, because originally it was part of it was kind of the flagship release of a streaming service called 365 Flicks, which director and sort of entrepreneur Philip Martinez tried to get off the ground. And the idea of it was they're going to have like an exclusive release, and then they will have the star will communicate with the fans. And basically Seagal was the only one on board, and they never managed to get anyone else. So Seagal had to do all these like not chat room kind of thing, but he had to be on a video call and people would type in their questions or whatever. If they bought the film, they got sort of get the rights to join in. So I bought this from 365 Flicks. I think it did get a separate release through an official distributor, because these are like print to order.
Yeah, when I first heard about it years ago, when IMDb was a thing in the mid 2000s, like there wasn't any way to actually find it. I saw a few occasional YouTube clips, and it was just one of those that years later we can now see it because it's like was released on those Mill Creek, like 10 DVD packs. But it's like that's it. You're not gonna. Yeah.
Well, sorry, what film are you talking about? Because I'm talking about
Clementine.
Oh, Clementine. Sorry, I'm talking about Attrition.
Oh, shit. I keep getting... But it's a similar kind of premise, though. I mean...
well, see, Clementine is a film that he only had a cameo in, where he plays a fighter. It's kind of a melodrama.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, whereas... So Attrition is... He's again, possibly former special forces or whatever, but he's known only as Axe. He's running like a clinic. He's working as a doctor. Again... This kind of goes back to The Patriot. It's very similar to The Patriot and the kind of setup of where he's living and what he's doing. He's a healer. He wants to play a healer. So he was a healer using Chinese medicine or whatever in The Patriot, and he's doing the same here. But he's living in I think it's Thailand. I can't remember exactly.
Something like that. If it's not Thailand, where else will he be accepted?
I know. I'm sure that if nothing else, that's where it was shot. But he's working with themes that he's interested in. He's more invested as a performer. He's not getting dubbed and stuff. He's got good he's got good. I mean, he's getting doubled, obviously, but he's got excellent support, like Louis Van Suong, who's most known for the sort of horror kung fu movie Ricky.
Oh wow!
And and he's got. See, what's interesting is these three films. They're all made by very artistically inclined directors. So Ching Su Tong did Belly of the Beast, Mink music video, mainly music video sort of creative, did Into the Sun, and this one was by a guy called Matthew Weschler. I think he's a German director, and he brings real style to the film. I mean, I think the film, you can easily criticize the film because it knocks off Asian films like The Grandmaster, and Seagal is trying to be this wise,
know-it-all
teacher, wise teacher kind of character and stuff. And then it kind of adds in this leading a team kind of thing again, where they kind of in the second part of the film, they kind of gets the team back together and whatnot. But it's very stylishly shot. It's got some really artful moments in it. I think it's definitely the best film he's made of that period. Probably the best film he's made in since like he did Exit Wounds and stuff. Even better than Into the Sun, probably in some respects, maybe.
Right.
Certainly in the same sort of range. It's a really nice, really well made film, I think. And I think but what's interesting is that all these films are from the 2000s. Although he's a guy who's really interested in Asian culture, he didn't explore that. He didn't go into that until his DTV part of his career, because he was always making films in America. It was apart from On Deadly Ground, where they went to Alaska, but it was all it's all cities. It's Chicago. It's I can't remember. It's New York. I guess so. It's all these kind of settings, and then it's like even the rural settings that with like Fire Down Below and The Patriot. It's Appalachia. It's Montana. And he's going out of the country.
And even though he's not able to be diverse, he attempts to be diverse. He's just like, he never has the same persona. Whenever he's hanging out with an all black star cast, like in Urban Justice, he's acting all like he's from the hood.
Yes.
And like to say, his Chicago set movies, he's trying to do, yeah, man, I'm from Chicago. I'm a New Jersey guy. Some shit like that.
Yeah, because I think in his personal life, I think he's drawn to cultures and drawn to kind of personality, and he wants to be part of something else. I think that's ingrained in him. It's like he went to Japan. He was like he wanted to be there, but not just be there, but and develop the culture and be ingrained.
It's like he wanted to
stand out.
Yeah, because
but also stand out, because if he's in Japan, he's somebody to be noticed. He's the outsider who's both inside and outside. He gets to be part of it, but also he stands out from the crowd. So there was films like Out for Justice or whatever, where he was going sort of against gangsters, but he really kind of wanted to be like the gangster. He wanted to be sort of ingratiated with them, it seems. And there's evidence in his real life that there were associations that were happening with the mob, and that ultimately was kind of one of the downfalls of his business.
One of his producers was
Nasso, Julius Arnasso. Most of his hit films were made with him, and then kind of when their relationship broke apart, that was kind of also at the end of his theatrical career. And
it was funny though, because the Smoking Gun reported that he was like brought in by the feds to like testify against him, and he recorded an account that was like in his head, and it's like I don't know if he's like bipolar or something, but he seems to have he's always in fantasy land, and he just seems to think that's just how everyone rolls. And it's just like, so he's there testifying on the stand. They're like, you may step down, Mr. Seagal. That is not at all in the record. But thank you. That helps us indicate that our point in that he's a terrible person.
Yeah, I'd say I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, the validity, for want of a better word, of a number of the accounts that Seagal makes, both of talking about himself and you know relating experiences and things. I think for me personally, I think he's I think to an extent he's a pathological liar. I don't think he can help himself. I think he kind of
it's like he was at the dojo
things.
and he was there and he just seemed to think, hey, I should do that in movies. And it's just so funny how he was training Sean Connery and broke his wrist on that unofficial James Bond movie he did.
Never Say Never Again. Yeah. So he's kind of I think he did work on The Challenge as well as a consultant with Scott Glenn, which I've always wanted to see. Haven't had a chance to. Even recently, you know, he wrote a book with this other writer called The Way of the Shadow Wolves, and in that book he kind of says I'm part Native American. He kind of tries to present himself like I'm an Native, and he casts in the book. He's essentially casting himself as the lead character, which doesn't really fit because even the book has him on the cover. Now, when you think of actors who write books or have books ghostwritten or whatever you want to call it, even if they don't write themselves, the covers are normally quite independent. They're not normally selling them, but they might have the name of the star. So Marlon Brando writes a book. It says Marlon Brando in big letters. It doesn't have a picture of Marlon Brando on it. But Steven Seagal's book has a big picture of Steven Seagal on. I think that's really unusual. Where Wesley Snipes wrote his sort of Christian Blade book.
I remember
a few years
that.
ago.
I still have that copy and I haven't even read it yet. But yeah.
I listened to the audiobook, which unfortunately wasn't read by Wesley Snipes. That was such a disappointment when I got that.
It was voice doubled, just like in his actual movies where he's voice doubled.
But it shows a character that looks a lot like Blade, but it's not showing Wesley Snipes. So this book. So anyway, I've got off track, but in that he's kind of presenting himself and he's kind of linking himself to Native American in a similar way, I guess. So he's not in On Deadly Ground. He wasn't. He was still the outsider, sort of going, and in The Patriot as well. He was sort of associated to the culture, but he wasn't part of it. He wasn't saying I am. He was sort of. So that's a thing. So in Attrition, he's kind of like, is he presenting himself? Does he think he's Asian in that? We're not sure or anything. But anyway, so I think that's a really interesting trilogy that people should check out if they haven't. I say not an official trilogy, but certainly a thematic trilogy. Now, I did bypass The Foreigner, which was the film that he made with Andrew Stevens, his franchise pictures, directly after Half Past Dead. But the budget was, drastically different. And this is the first of his two Jonathan Cold movies, which don't really have any sort of continuity between them.
Yeah.
They're actually shot very differently. I think. Would you agree? They're quite
different. This one's being a gangster movie, and it's frustrating because 1 minute it's well shot, the next minute it's just very frustrating. It just is very confusing and disorienting, and not in a good way. And like you say, I mean, part 2 just feels like it's an episode of Spooks, MI5 or even 24, and you're like, so they're trying to stop these guys who are smuggling in a bomb, and then it just ends where everyone gets blown up, and you're like, what did I just see for 90 minutes?
What I thought was funny was the ending of it is not dissimilar to the ending of The Dark Knight Rises. Where he flies out to sea to set the explosive off.
Yeah, it only predated it, so damn you, Dark Knight Rises, you ripped this off.
Yeah, so The Foreigner it was shot in Poland, and he did 2 films for Andrew Stevens for franchise in Poland. He did that and Out of Reach. This one, Out of Reach, I think, is, although it's very badly put together and got very, very bad dubbing and stuff in it, it's a more fun movie. The Foreigner the Foreigner was a real shock when I first saw it in terms of the low quality. It's sad to say, but when films go to European countries, former Soviet blocs or countries and stuff, to film, the look and that it's and you're used to those American settings, the sort of grand cities and fancy buildings and then you're suddenly in like fields and really run down buildings and stuff. It's not a very handsome movie. It's kind of pretty. The locations aren't very interesting. The plot is really, really confusing. The action isn't that great. There's not a lot to recommend it. I've been to Poland a few times, and I have actually visited a couple of the sets. Visited a couple of the locations. So I went to the palace. There's a place called Łazienki Palace, which they shot. 2 or 3 of the locations in The Foreigner were shot there, including there's a rich guy who he has to break into this rich guy's house because the guy is supposed to deliver the packages. This rich guy in, I think it's supposed to be Germany, but it's shot. So I went to that location, and also he shot Out of Reach was also shot in Warsaw.
Out of Reach is pretty much something he did on the side. It's just an easygoing assassination thriller, and Foreigner, like you say, I mean, it's a very intriguing place that could have worked, but it's just so confusing and unengaging.
Super confusing. Yeah.
I mean, it opens out with like someone going outside and like their car and mailbox blows up, and so you're just like, bombs don't work that way, and what's going on here, and why do I care? I literally just saw this person just a second ago. I have no connection to him, but Seagal's fan base is just very unusual in that he's kind of just was critic proof. Those who have been watching his movies since they were like 10 years old were just like, yeah, I'm down for the count. And if I don't like it, they weren't aware of his ego. So they just were just like, yeah, if it sucks, it's just because someone else screwed up. But more than half the time he was suggesting ideas or refusing to do something to where, all these filmmakers are having to just, just put a gun to their head or just say, well, whatever we got to do to get this done. At this point, something's got to get in the canon. Right now, we got just a mess, and that's just all we got.
Yeah, he did this one with director Michael Oblowitz, who he also did Out for a Kill with, which I think is a much more colourful film. I think
it
Out for a
definitely
Kill
makes better sense. This one.
Well, it's a lot. Yeah, it does make a bit more sense, much more interesting. I mean, it's
basically
quite basic.
He just goes around and just kicks a bunch of gangsters' asses, and that's it.
Yeah,
it's skills.
When you look at that film, it's kind of he's only in scenes where he's. It's exactly unusual for the period actually, because it's a very action-heavy role for him. He kind of has a scene where he, has an action scene. He disappears off screen, and they kind of have these other sort of side characters sort of speculating on what he's up to and sort of investigating. And then he comes in and then he, takes somebody else out, they cut away. It's a series of set pieces, basically. The Foreign doesn't really have that. It's kind of very light on action. It's a Cold War spy thriller kind of film, but which is sort of out of time. It's kind of it doesn't really fit him, and it doesn't really work. They clearly didn't have much money. But when he gets
British actors are there, and they don't really seem to know what to do. And when it goes into this whole "I'm avenging my brother" or "your family and you betrayed me," you're just like,
Yeah, like Max Ryan is quite fun in it, but his character basically keeps dying and living. So he's just shooting and just killing people left, right. It doesn't make any sense. I guess that's something they kept changing in the edit. It was like maybe he was killed off, but then they decided to actually let's shoot another scene with him. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
But Black Dawn then becomes a different kettle of fish. I mean, Black Dawn opens with the most irritating opening sequence where they're playing this song with this like quote from the baddies saying that they're gonna, no one will survive or something, whatever. And they just keep repeating the same line over and over again. It's like for like several minutes. But then it kicks in. It turns out it's Jonathan Cold again, but he's back in the US. So that actually gives the film a bit more production value, because it's like, oh, he's not shooting this in Europe again. I mean, I love Poland. Poland's really nice, but it doesn't look very good in the movie, and it's not very, it's not very appealing. So having him back in the US for Black Dawn, it does elevate it a bit. The film doesn't have the sort of explosions and helicopters and stuff that the art, the cover, the box art.
Some of it even gives away, like the explosion that goes off at the end, where you're like, spoiler.
Well, it shows it in a city. It's like, I was like, well, no, they're trying to stop that. And there is an explosion, but it's kind of, yeah.
So while The Foreigner felt like it was just a disorganized movie that I could have sworn must have been done by someone like Albert Pion, and everyone kept cutting stuff out. This one feels like an Olivier Grunner film, except it had a bit of a budget thanks to Andrew Stevens, and then it's just like from that point on, like much like all the other movies, like Seagal is not even in the same fight scenes, so half the time you're like, hey, half your spy crew just got killed. Where the hell were you? You're walking up the stairs with the terrorists. Just
there's a number of scenes. This is where you're sort of getting films where they're introducing tons of supporting characters, and so Seagal's just kind of sitting at the back or something, and he's not even. And you can guess they were probably shooting all these dialogue scenes without his involvement, and then they kind of cut to a shot of him. Whether they might have got him to stand there for a minite or something.
A lot of the time, it is a stunt double walk, climbing up a ledge, and you're like,
there is.
I don't need to see that. That's literally killing time. That's like, I don't need to see that at all. I need to see, how the car chase that you just interrupted ends. Does the car explode? Do the terrorists, come out and reveal their plan? And, Timothy Carhart, this actor who's just been on all kinds of things, CSI and Ghostbusters, is really hamming it up. And he's like a CIA individual who shoots the two main bad guys. Or no, he shoots like two of the good guys and then takes the bomb that they've retrieved from the terrorists or some shit. And you're just like, what? It's just barely been in here, but man, everyone is just hamming it. They know what kind of a movie they're in, so they're just not trying. And this is like,
and they've got this. This is an example of where they expected Seagal to do more action than I think he wanted to do. So there's action scenes thrown in, which I'm sure he was not involved in at all. There's whole. I think this one's got like 2 or 3 sequences where it's like, we need a Seagal fight scene, but he doesn't want to do it. So
even on the cover,
we're just going to shoot the whole thing.
For the US cover, there's like, him with his hands crossed, and down below there's like someone who supposedly looks like him, but it doesn't really look like him, fighting a guy, flying through the air with a kick aimed at his face. And I'm like, yeah.
I think there's been a couple of UK releases. There was I think I remember seeing a release where there's a guy, flying across the image, like a flying kick kind of thing, was like not in there at all. This was, again, it's another example where they got a cinematographer, gets a shot to direct. Alexander Grushinsky.
Those are like the people who put up with them. It's like he likes how they photograph him, but he hates being bossed around. And so it's just like, well, if they're a director, they're going to end up kind of bossing you around because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So it is kind of a wild recruitment. And it's like he must have known that they'll take a pay cut because they're just starting out, and they'll probably kiss his ass, I guess. I don't know. But it's funny because, I think from this point on, like, the Foreigner films are, Jonathan Cold is basically, it might as well be the same person as, John Alexander, those films that he does later, because none of them have anything to do with each other other than that he's supposedly playing the same, ex-Special Forces guy.
Yeah, absolutely. They are basically very interchangeable. So yeah, I'm not a fan of the Jonathan Cold movies. They're very low on my.
Was cool, and actually, Trejo's there, I mean, even Zai Ma, who's been a big.
Yeah.
He's been in everything. Arrival, Martial Law, 24, and even just a bunch of other movies. Just often playing a Chinese immigrant or a dad or a diplomat with questionable integrity, and is like he's wasted there, and all the movies.
Well, that was
like
he was in A Good Man.
Yes,
and
right. With Brian Mann
and Bren Foster and Ving Rhames, and that's the. So
and
that's
these
Force
were
of
hard to
Execution.
distinguish because he was doing them so much back to back with all the Keanu Waxman movies, and it's like he would do his version of Man on Fire and Taken while doing throwbacks to his first 4 films, and then these. Once again, it's like he's trying to assemble his version of the A-Team, or it's like the Equalizer. If there was like 6 of them all going out and killing a bunch of gangsters, but like you say, because they're in such individual scenes, the cast just never clicks with one another, despite Brent Foster of, The Last Ship fame trying to put on a cool bunch of martial arts fights, and Ving Rhames being reliable. It's just like you say, it just drags. It's just too much.
Well, the thing is with that is that Seagal he kind of must have enjoyed what he did with Machete, because he in Force of Execution, he's taking on more. They try to make him a goodie, as not a good. They try to make him sort of a redeemable character in some sense, but he is a villain in Force of Execution, and Bren Foster's the hero. So there's a real shift there in what the film is, and this is the start of what's referred to as like the Alexander trilogy, and in like Wikipedia says that A Good Man, which came after, and Mercenary Absolution, or just Absolution as it's known, that they're connected and one's a prequel or whatever. I don't think that's the case. I think the common thread is that Alexander is either the first or last name of the character.
Probably the producers just adding info there, seeing if building up hype, and you're like, that's just not doing it any service, because again, no one watching these movies was even caring if they were related. They were just going because, hey, they're still, loyal fans of Seagal, and they just wanted a fun Friday night movie. And it's just, it's kind of like if you were to just put a random verses or, number in the title. It doesn't even necessarily have anything to do with anything. And the audience that's going after this really doesn't care. They just want to see him, do his I'm a sensei thing and pretend to shoot at bad guys with a giant machine gun, and it's just very convoluted too, and it's like any of them could literally come before the other if you're going to get that very apparent, that very trivial. It's like
I watched A Good Man and Mercenary Absolution. I couldn't get my hands on Force of Execution, but I watched Good Man and Absolution back to back, and there are themes that are familiar, that are similar, and they both end with an uncomfortable sort of love scene with a young Eastern European woman. But apart from that, I think they're clearly not supposed to be the same thing. I mean,
they might as well be remakes.
Force of Execution. Basically, but Force of Execution he's credited as Alexander Coates, and then he's just Alexander in A Good Man, which I don't think is related. I think they just use the same character name. And then in Absolution, he becomes John Alexander, and then later he does General Commander, where he becomes Jake Alexander. I think it's just they've just crossed over. They just go, let's just call it that. It's like the way his characters used to. I mean, it was also Jake.
Some of it could easily be leftover footage, and he just shoots a few new scenes. It doesn't. It really doesn't matter. But like you say, it is. At the same time, for us cult film buffs, it's still pretty intriguing to find out, even though it's just not worth the trouble to track down the movies.
I think it's just interchangeable names: John, Jake, Jack, Jonathan. He's played lots of characters with very similar names. John Seeger, for example, in Mercenary for Justice, and and then he was John Sands in Flight of Fury. They just like to keep it simple. Go back, and during this period, which is from about the 2013 onwards, they just keep using the name Alexander for some reason. But if you do say, okay, it's an Alexander series, if we look at it as sort of a connection in that way. Force of Execution is interesting because it introduces the goatee, which he's stuck with us ever since. He also was playing a villain in that movie, more of a, he's sort of stepping back, although he's top billed. That's quite interesting that he's more of a bad guy. With A Good Man and Mercenary Absolution, he's the hero again, but we've once again, like in Force of Execution, there's the proxy hero. So Victor Webster is in A Good Man, and he has some pretty good fight scenes. And as we said before, Byron Mann's back doing a very similar kind of
Vinnie
setup.
Jones is back. He's hamming it up.
Yeah.
It's all, and none of them look like they're even in the same room with them. That one just stands out like a sore thumb. At that point, you're just like, okay, well, you came here for the cheese, so this is pretty much what it has to offer. And the trailer and even just the nightclub scenes feel like they're just trying to cash in on the John Wick kind of scene at that point. Just have a lot of loud music.
Those actual club scenes, which quite a few of the films have, it's either a club scene or a strip club or whatever. The club scenes actually in Absolution kind of give it a bit of a production value to extent.
It really does, yeah.
Because A Good Man doesn't have much production value at all, apart from Time Hour's really good, and Victor Webster and that. But all the locations and that, it is very low budget. But I think they both actually.
That was pretty much the only. Yeah, it was the only thing it was the only real creative vibe that the filmmakers wanted to offer. Is like, hey, let us at least set the mood before Seagal does whatever Seagal wants to do.
Yeah, the weird thing is, in A Good Man, it's got this really long prologue of him going on a mission. Him and this other guy. It's like there's only two of them, and they're trying to take out a terrorist, and they accidentally. I think a young girl gets killed or something, which becomes the thing that he wants redemption for. But really, they didn't need to show any of that. That could have just been mentioned or shown as a very brief flashback. Yeah. I think they shot that whole sequence just because Steven Seagal wanted to get, dressed up and shoot this kind of mission sequence, which he's done a couple of times. But in both films, he comes to the help of a young woman. It's a typical sort of damsel in distress kind of situation. In the first one, it's a young girl's, I think she ends up getting taken hostage. And then in Absolution, it's Vinnie Jones is he's basically a serial killer, but he's like killing people and shooting on video cameras. There's some
so weird because he looks like a gangster. And yet,
yeah, well, that's the thing. They add in these different things.
Serial killer. So it's like it might as well just be called Seagal, the leftover deleted scenes that I want to somehow staple together. It's like if you and I were to basically say, "Hey, we want to write, an essay, but we don't want to do the work. So let's just write a bunch of mumbo jumbo and staple it together, and hopefully someone will think it's art. We'll get a passing grade." It's like, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah, so the Vinnie Jones he's not very good in it. I think he was better in Submerged. He's kind of he's not great.
I don't think he took it seriously at all. Absolution,
they kind of do this, which has happened in a couple of films. Like in the Patriot and stuff. I guess it's like there's these big coincidences, and you've got him going on. Steven Seagal's character and Byron's man, they go on a mission together to take someone out, and it just so happens that the people that they're working for, or the people they're working for are working with, are the same guy who the young woman who comes, just happens to encounter him and ask him for help. The characters all end up. Oh, what are the chances of that? They're actually connected. So the film is trying to combine different plot elements to try and fill the running time, I think. And that's, I think, what happens with A Good Man is kind of they add this really long prologue.
Unfortunately so.
To add in this whole other element, which doesn't really need to be there. I actually liked them, though, to be honest. I rewatched them. I didn't like them the first time, but I liked A Good Man and Mercenary Absolution for all that, they are flawed. They're not great. They're certainly nowhere near any of the sort of best. I think that I prefer them probably to the Jonathan Cold movies, but I think that's probably damning with faint praise.
I wouldn't be surprised if at this stage he comes up with a whole different franchise, and it's him basically, being a sensei, forming his own academy school, or teaching people how to be as spies.
Well, I guess what you could do is you could do like a Cobra Kai kind of thing, and you could follow you could follow his character of Nico Toscani as he goes back to the dojo or something.
There you go. And other people have joked about he should do a cooking reality show. That would be funny. He assumes the identity of a chef. He's like, "See, I know how to cook great food." Kung fu in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
I know what makes it all work. I am Steven Seagal, the Iron Chef.
So we've covered the Under Siege franchise, Jonathan Cold, Alexander. We've looked at his environmental theme trilogy and his Asian theme trilogy.
And how the first three movies all in some way correspond with his standalone films, his buddy movies. So it's like,
yeah, and obviously you could look at all the films where he plays cops. You could kind of put all those together, and all the we've talked about the films where he's teamed up with rappers and.
Thing, he's a spy who thinks he works for the CIA but really doesn't, but he keeps changing his name because he's wanted by basically everyone on the planet.
So we've only touched on sort of part of his filmography. We're not going to sort of get into the rest of it, but out of these films, are there any that are that you think are particularly worth watching, or that you think that you liked more than others? I'm just sort of interested to know.
I'm pretty much on the same page as you, where there's some fun in the second Under Siege and parts of either Half Past Dead movie, and again, you can have fun with the first two environmental thrillers he does, and then the rest is basically, especially Absolution, just a 2 a.m. movie where you can have a fun drinking game with your buddies who've stayed over tonight. It's just, it is what it is, and that's basically kind of what his movies have become. Do
you think he'll be back?
He might try doing another Machete type cameo, but I think that's as good as he's going to get. But for now, I think he's more content just working for himself, doing what he wants to do with people who will put up with his persona.
Yeah, I think I'd be surprised if he doesn't Keanu Waxman movie. I don't know what he's done more recently, but it's interesting. What I find fascinating is you look at all these films, which on the surface everyone thinks they're basically the same thing, but they are doing lots of different things. They're exploring lots of different themes. They're taking elements of Seagal's personality, because he's got that power and that authority and that ego. He's putting this stamp on. This is what Vern's whole thing was with Seagalogy and with his variation on the auteur theory of saying that Seagal is kind of the key ingredient, and nobody else could have really done the films that he's done. Who else would have made On Deadly Ground? I mean, other people have done environmental thrillers and stuff, but I don't think there's anyone else who could have made a film like that but Steven Seagal. It's just all him.
If he's not being a spy for Vladimir Putin, he's doing these kinds of nutty movies.
Oh, now this is the thing. Will he ever make a film in Russia? That's what I'm wondering. If he's living there now. Russia's got quite a lot of movies being made. Why the hell hasn't he appeared in a Russian movie?
Perhaps if he gets canceled, he might stick to just Russia. If he doesn't get canceled, he might go there eventually. I don't know if he just doesn't want to travel all that much, or if he just wants to just do everything just very dirt cheap. But I can see him getting some kind of just more Russian actors or other people in his films more often. You just never know with Steven. He is basically, I feel like he goes home every day and says, how can I be surprising without actually trying? Get it? Got it? Good. Okay, I'll get a random out-of-work NBA player in my movie. I'll get another rapper who everyone forgot was still alive, and then, yes, I'll get some other random British actor or Russian guy who was kind of a big thing, but in between A-list and B-list projects right now. So thank you ever so much, Mr. Hawes, for being on here, and feel free to do a quick plug of Direct-to-Video Digest.
Thanks. Yeah. So yeah, there was. Thank you for letting me talk about my favorite subject, Steven Seagal.
Great
DTV Digest is generally weekly podcast that I do with my pal Mike Parkin. He initiated the whole thing. It's his show. I sort of help him make selections on what we're going to cover, and you know, I view myself as sort of a key contributor, but it's his baby. He does all the work, so it's I really like working on that. We also look at so on that film we look at direct-to-video films of all kinds, generally genre films, and we also have a throwback section where we like to go back to like sometimes just a few years back, often back to the 90s, the sort of the heyday when we fell in love with these kind of movies, and that's a lot of fun. And we also focus on short films, which is a little bit of which is a slightly different thing, but also kind of falls in the same wheelhouse because these are films that are not generally seen at cinemas or anything. You can find a lot of them are generally found on YouTube or Vimeo. So I'm quite passionate about those. So we do what we call, we have the short shot segment, and we also do a separate spin-off podcast called DTV Digest Short Shots. We've got a Twitter page where we recommend a new short film every day. You can find our main show on on Twitter, the DTV Digest, and the short films feed you can find at the DTV Digest Short Shots. You can listen to the show on Audible or Podbean, and that's if you like what you hear, let us know. That would be great. If there's anything you think we should cover in a throwback, just give us a shout. We're always we're on Facebook as well, so you can look up the DTV Digest on Facebook. We also look at we post. It's only applicable to the UK, but we post what's out each week, what new releases there are, as well as a chart. So we sort of I look at like the top 100 video releases, extract from that what the DTV releases are, and then we assemble what our top 5, and we. It's
good to have an international crowd.
Yeah, so we like to say, what is doing successful. Is where is Bruce Willis in the chart this week? Is he?
Starring in an ensemble that everyone will see, or an ensemble that few will see. But here it is.
Well, there was a Bruce Willis film that came out, Killing Field, which you had to survive the game, which I think performed less well than an Asylum Dune knockoff, which I was really surprised by.
An LA theater for like 2 weeks, and then the same week it was coming out to Blu-ray. It was very confusing, and I think the problem is he's kind of in Cameron Mitchell, Telly Savalas land, where he keeps getting saddled with people who don't seem to have a professional business structure to any of their movie releases. So it's very troublesome. But thank you ever so much for being on here.
Thank you.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try...
They must be destroyed on sight!
The new Podcast Cure-All, sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of...
They must be destroyed on sight!
As needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pott's disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds? Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am, in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in you.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week, I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of here.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this movie.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history all popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped from watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was
How
going to be
did
a
you
rough
watch
one.
this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
Greetings, friends. My name is Dean Legero, and I'm the host of the 3324 podcast. I invite you to join me and my lifelong friend Eric Kuber to come with us as we discuss the music and movies that shaped our life. Each week, we'll pick an album or film that we really connect to, and not only give you some great info and trivia, but also discuss, debate, and celebrate what it means to us and the journey it took us on. We also look forward to hearing from you and giving us some of your picks for us to check out and discuss. I think it'll be a really fun experience, so come along with us for the ride. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider and at 3324.buzzsprout.com. Thanks for your time, and welcome to the 3324 family.
It's time, let's check our cue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. Whether one laughs, plot holes, or gratuitous movies, it's time to get busy with your friend Steven Izzy.
At eilfm.podbean.com.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up